our dear speakers, our dear viewers, our session for this session's title is titled Film Production Catalyzing Social Changes. And our speaker for this session is brought far away from United States of America. So our speaker's name is Mustafa Dustin Craun. He is a filmmaker, writer, and a digital media producer, and his works in digital media has been featured in over 200 global publications. And Mustafa Dustin Craun has produced 10 short films to date, and including A Prayer Beyond Borders and many more. And he is currently working on his first feature-length documentary, A Prayer Beyond Borders. So our speaker at this session is from US, California, and at this time is they are having their dawn prayer, subuh prayer, and Mustafa Dustin Craun will be with us at the session of Q&A session. But not to worry, we have made a pre-recording session, and we brought to you Mustafa Dustin Craun.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings to you all. I pray that you're well in Malaysia. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me. Thank you to the students, and thank you to everyone that's worked so hard behind the scenes. I know what it's like. I've been having conferences nonstop this year. It's really important that we create spaces for these global gatherings, and I pray that this is successful. I pray that you all gain from this, and I pray that we can give you some small insight. Malaysia is one of my favorite places in the world, and I've received so much endless blessing from its people and from its lands, and just from all the barakah of that place. I come to you today from Southern California with a heavy heart and a lot of sadness, but at the same time, great hope. This has been one of the most difficult years of any of our lives, especially those of us who are a bit younger. This past week, we lost my beloved grandmother, Shirley Craun. So I didn't know whether or not I was going to be able to do this, but alhamdulillah, I really wanted to pull through for you all. And a month before that, we lost my other grandmother, Joan Barthel. May Allah bless them and give them Jannah Firdaus, inshallah. But at the same time, just last month, we were also blessed with a beautiful, alhamdulillah, new daughter. And so these are our lives, right? And these are especially our lives in these times where we're inside, we're much more reflective on our state, and everything happening around us seems to be so heightened. This is our bodily existence, right, on this earth, that all lies between these two realities of our birth and our death. After this year of endless upheaval that has touched all of our world and each of our hearts, it's so important that we remember the promise of the words in the Quran that with hardship comes ease. We pray for God's breezes of mercy and ease to bring an end to our collective suffering. It's important that we reflect deeply on these verses and these times from Surah Al-Sharh, these ayats about the opening of the heart. None of us would be here without that act, that original act, where the Prophet ﷺ had his heart opened by the angel Gabriel and purified by Allah, right? This, for each of us, is a lifelong and metaphysical reality that we must go through, that if we were to take this faith and this path seriously, that cleansing of our hearts and the transformation of our hearts and our lives from one of hardship to one of ease. Those of us who converted to Islam, myself now almost 20 years into this journey, we see this state of our hearts go from that of grave hardship and poison to one of light, guidance, and ease over the years during this spiritual marathon called life. Of course, with tafsir of Quran, there are layers of meaning. There's the literal meaning, the context in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, when and where the verses were revealed, and the deeper spiritual meaning of each verse that you find in some tafsirs, rare tafsirs, like the great Moroccan 19th century Sayyid Ibn Ajiba. Then, of course, the verses have the very specific meaning for each of us in our own lives, in our own hearts, a reality that can also change over the years as new meanings are peeled back for us. As a convert, these verses touch me in such a deep way. They are also verses with a deep secret prescribed for opening of the heart. As one example of this, with the advice on what to read over a child when they are in the womb, it is recommended from Habib Omar bin Hafiz to have the father read these verses over the child in the 7th month of the pregnancy 152 times. Surah Al-Shar, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Have we not, O Prophet, opened your heart for you with our guidance and lifted from you the burden which had washed down your back and raised for you your own renown? So indeed, with hardship comes ease. Indeed, with hardship comes ease. So whenever you become free from obligation, then stand in prayer and turn to your Lord alone in hope. I think also with these verses about the openings in our world, we can expect, inshallah, when this pandemic is over, in this promise from our Lord. As we are in quarantine, each of us should think about what we are building for the future of our world. Of course, different parts of the world are in more strict quarantines than others. Ours has mostly gone on where we're just going out for food and, groceries and things like that for 9 months now. And if we can think of that far ahead, if we can't think that far ahead of as we're each in quarantine, each of us should think about what we're building for the future of our world. And if we can't think that far ahead with all the death and pain surrounding us in these times, then we can at the very least reflect on what we can prepare for the future that is in our grave. These last 9 months have made people question their entire existence. Nothing looks nearly as invincible in our world as all the illusions of grandeur that preceded this time. And we can expect that when we come out of this, inshallah, soon, that so many people could turn to this deen, could turn to us looking for answers, and inshallah, we're prepared to have them. Of course, humans today, we like to imagine ourselves as the most technologically advanced peoples in the history of this earth, but look what can happen to our world, even with all this technology, something we can absolutely not control, that brings the entire planet suddenly to its knees, the entire economy, entire countries, and we don't even know what the end of this will be. Sure, we have hacked many earthly things, the ability to communicate across the world in an instant when it used to take months, the ability to access the world's libraries from almost anywhere on the planet, but these are degrees. There are degrees to this idea of progress and advancement. We are advanced in westernized sciences, but in the world of the spiritual sciences of existence, we are regressed and disconnected people. Ours is, of course, a living tradition, that of Islam, passed down from one teacher to the next. And as we think about the future of our world, of course, we must think, what does it mean to truly live as Muslims through the worldview, the vision, and promise of Islam? The secrets of past civilizations are found in some books, in some people who still walk this earth, and others were destroyed, like in the conquest of Mexico, where priests followed the conquistadors and destroyed some of the greatest libraries in the history of this world in Teotihuacan. One of my favorite places to travel on this earth is in what is today southern Mexico on the Yucatan Peninsula, an entire landmass that only emerged when the asteroid that destroyed the planets, the extinction of dinosaurs, struck the earth in the Gulf of Mexico. Chichen Itza, this beautiful sacred precinct there in these lands, this great pyramid of the Mayan people, a place where you enter and you do not wear shoes a space whose sacred geometry reminds me of Mecca. These are people, the Mayan people, that hacked time and space and spiritual dimensions. These are people that are known as some of the greatest masters of time in human existence, how well they know calendar, how perfect their calendar is. There's even a point there at Chichen Itza where there's a man in an engraving on one of the walls that if you were to take a description of the Prophet ﷺ and look at this engraving, you would think that perhaps that is him. How did they know him? This place, subhanAllah, right? The secrets of our world that we don't truly understand, and something that is interesting to reflect on, as the Americas are the great frontier of dawah in our world and where Islam is spreading rapidly in the Spanish language. On a much different spiritual pilgrimage a few years back, I went and visited the Wali Songo in Java, these saints that brought Islam to the Nusantara, to learn from their spiritual genius, and to the teacher of the Wali Songo, buried just off the coast of Malacca on Pulau Besar, Sultan Arifin. The spiritual genius of the Wali Songo, as we found on this trip with our beloved teacher, Sheikh Muhammad al-Jalani, was their ability to be bridges in their times using the cultural realities of the people. Ever since this trip, I've reflected on what would this look like in our own times. As a filmmaker, how can we create opportunities for filmmaking rooted in spirituality? We know how clear it is that this is one of the means of communication of our times. That's why it's so important that we have spiritually rooted filmmakers, film producers, film financiers who can create true beauty and spiritual art form in this media that involves that very difficult task and reality of the manipulation of light. Ideas I'll come back to towards the end of this talk. We have to understand, if we are to think about the future, how our world was constructed. This world based on desires today of wealth, luxury, being an influencer and YouTube star, and then with their mansions continuing these lifestyle cycles of desires. At the core of this was an idea that somehow this reality of endless desires is invincible. Yet we've so clearly seen that notion destroyed in front of all of our eyes, as this world has reflected from a collective cataclysm with a global pandemic, just like our world seems to suffer around every 100 years. The United States, my home country, and the root of so many of these desires, has been laid bare for what it truly is. Those of us who live here have seen it with our eyes, a land of Hollywood smoke and mirrors, this idea of this land of opportunity, when for so many, the reality of daily racialized oppression is laid bare in front of the world to see. People would always ask me about the US in my travels, and I would try to explain it in a way that they could fully understand. This reality where living in one of the wealthiest places in the world, California, also means living with one of the largest populations of homeless people in our planet. Hundreds of thousands of long-term homeless. And this was before the pandemic, let alone now, where we literally know homeless people's names who we've lived by for years. What does this mean, right? That this reality has existed for so long. COVID is obviously another indicator of this reality of my country and the state of our political leadership. There are nearly the same amount of people living in California as live in Malaysia. Malaysia has had 16,000 cases of COVID to date, and California has had more than 18,000 deaths and nearly 1 million cases, with what is potentially the worst part of the outbreak so far emerging right now. Today, of course, our world is much less ideological and largely driven by these desires if we are to compare to what the 20th century was like. For Muslims in the 21st century, we have seen 2 decades of global Islamophobia and governments that rule in the context of this supposed end of history. This neoliberal capital dominance that was created over decades by corporations and government rulers, and which exists mostly unquestioned now, even despite the pandemic, showing the great inequality created by these economic systems around the world. Systems where individuals, investors, and corporations become wealthy, while the social contract of the nation state and basic care therein are destroyed, and people have absolutely nowhere to turn. Those of us observing the world closely understand that if the 19th century was the European century, and if the 20th century was the American century, then in so many ways the 21st century is already the Asian century, as the United States continues its rapid decline. But of course, this is also a world today where power is more split into factions than it was before, of elites, as we have seen so explicitly during the Trump administration, from politicians to narco-style underworld networks that exist around the world to corporations. Ours is a world manufactured in backdealing and corruption, where Malaysia's own example, making global headlines with the now imprisoned and defamed Najib Abdul Razak and his wife Roshma, whose crimes, as bad as they were, are likely a drop in the bucket compared to the corruption by neo-fascist governments like Donald Trump's, like Mohammed bin Salman's in Saudi Arabia, and like Bolsonaro's Brazil. We've gone from being people who are ideologically driven to being driven by our own nafs, where everyone imagines they can be king of the world. A world driven by manufactured narratives, algorithms, and, to put it frankly, endless political propaganda fed by the global monoculture of Netflix and now American and Chinese desires of upper middle class wealth. The agents of this now global power that is destroying the very planet we inhabit is one that can be very difficult to pinpoint exactly. In my 20s, I would walk around the markets throughout the world, and you would see t-shirts of Malcolm X and Che Guevara and Frida Kahlo, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, leaders who stood for collective justice for all people. Today, you walk around these same markets and you find Avengers t-shirts, Superman, Batman, imagined individuals who stand for themselves, usually tragic or fallen heroes, not even with the same narrative arc of something like Star Wars and the hero's journey that more closely resembles the ethical and virtue-oriented storytelling of Islamic history. There is a saying that living in California is like living in the future of the United States. And as true as I've found that to be, I would add to that statement that living in Asia is living even further into our world's future, which I have been blessed to do living in Malaysia for several years. If you drive into Kuala Lumpur at night, you come across one of the world's truly stunning man-made structures, the Petronas Towers, the tallest building in the world until 2004. These twin skyscrapers lit up at night rise out of the city and into the sky like a temple to our modern world that looks like a 1,000-foot still mirror of the ancient Angkor Wat temple in Cambodia. As you get closer to the building, you see in its details that each tower is shaped in a common symbol of Islamic architecture, as an 8-pointed star known as the Rub al-Hizb. This building is surprising in its beauty, that even after living in KL for over a year, I still would stare at it every time I came into the city. At the ground level, as you drive into the city on the highway, instead of a regular sign marking the city limits, you find in most places in the world, you instead pass a prayer written in Arabic with the KL city crest that reads, Ya Allah, Rahmatullah, Kuala Lumpur. Oh God, bless and have mercy on Kuala Lumpur. Ameen. In the call and response prayer style of Muslims around the world, many of us answer with full sincerity, Ameen, Amen, in the Christian tradition. Recently, they replaced these signs as the city was preparing to host the ASEAN Games with a new slogan defining KL as a city of contrast and diversity. While the design motifs of the city take on a mixture of classical Islamic, Malay, Chinese, Indian, and contemporary styles, Kuala Lumpur is fully unique in its standing as the most diverse Muslim majority city in the world. Southeast Asia as a whole is a unique meeting point of Hindu, Buddhist, Chinese, Islamic, and Western civilizations mixed with local indigenous beliefs and traditions. This is a region of the world where these civilizations have come together as if they were each smaller rivers meeting as they enter the ocean of humanity. KL as a city is still so young in its permanent development that most Malaysians still have ties to other parts of the country. The kampongs are villages where their parents grew up, and each year during the Chinese New Year and Hari Raya, the Eid celebrations after Ramadan, the city almost completely empties out as everyone goes to their villages to celebrate with their families. Malaysia, like Kuala Lumpur, is a young country in the nation-state sense, but ancient as a place of trade and confluence of peoples, part of the larger archipelago of islands which stretch from the Malay Peninsula across the islands of what is today known as Indonesia, all the way to the southern Philippines, an area called the Nusantara, whose people have shared beliefs, customs, shared lineage, and shared religious beliefs that when taken together make up the largest population of Muslims in the world. Yet, what does the world know of these populations? Very little, if anything, unfortunately, right? It was during one of those holidays when the city emptied out a few years ago, living in the midst of that beautiful, diverse, thriving Muslim metropolis, that I first conceptualized the Center for Global Muslim Life. It was during this time in KL in 2017 and 2018 that I started reflecting with a group of thinkers, artists, and community leaders on how little we actually know about the diversity of Muslim life around the world. We know about our set of crises, the wars, and Islamophobia, but what do we know about the leaders in our community building the collective future of the world's largest and most diverse faith? What do we know about Muslims making a social and spiritual impact around our world? What do we know about diverse narratives about Muslims being produced around the world, the diverse startups growing around the world to serve Muslim communities? We ask the question, what would it look like to create a center that is future-oriented and that creates spaces for cultural producers? What would it look like to create something truly visionary and move away from the constant reactionary thinking that our community has been stuck in for the last 20 years? Today, global Muslim communities are known primarily through the singular narrative produced through media and cultural production of terrorism, war, Islamophobia, and the global refugee crisis, with media and academic institution focusing on Arab Muslims, who make up only 15 to 20% of global Muslim populations. Nearly 70% of the world's Muslims live in Asia and Africa. Alhamdulillah, I've also been blessed to live in Ghana and in Morocco and spend time in Egypt and spend time in Africa and see the incredible diverse Muslim populations in Africa as well. But yet these populations are paid little attention. The 70% of the world's Muslims. Muslims are unique as a multi-civilizational community with large diasporas of peoples all around the world, with large populations in Southeast Asia, South Asia, throughout North, East, and West Africa, with large populations across the Middle East and Eastern Europe, and with large minority populations in Europe, East Asia, and growing throughout the Americas, not just in the United States and Canada. Over the next 50 years, our world will see unprecedented change, with more than 70% of humanity is expected to live in urban areas as global power will continue to shift to Asia. Technology will play an even more heavily increasing role in our world, and daily lives, and climate change will impact our world in ways that we cannot fully predict. The landscape of religious communities will also change rapidly over the coming half century, as global Muslim populations will grow from an expected population, what is right now around 2 billion people, to over 3 billion by 27, making Islam the largest religion in the world for the first time, and going from 1/4 of humanity to 1/3 of humanity. These brothers and sisters are the next 50 years of our time here on earth. What will we do with it? Muslims have created unique global networks that, despite great differences across communities, have historically shown strong solidarities, most explicitly represented in the life and legacy of our beloved Malcolm X, his global vision of Islam, what Sohail Dolatzai calls the Muslim International. This international collective of global Muslim life is a call to global solidarity amongst Muslims and with peoples throughout the world who face similar forms of oppression. As Dolatzai clearly states, Malcolm forced and compelled the Muslim International to be a broad and inclusive space that understands the overlapping histories and interconnected struggles that not only shape the modern world, but that also shape the conscience of the Muslim International as a site for radical justice and equality. Today, Muslim communities, of course, face oppression, but yet we're building resistances both within Muslim majority countries as well as throughout the US, throughout the Americas, in Europe, and in Australia and New Zealand. I believe this period of oppression, brothers and sisters, is inshallah coming to an end. And we're about to see a great transformation in our world. This reality of overlapping countries where Muslim make up large minority diasporic populations and global spaces of social impact, political and artistic resistance is an emerging reality that has been grossly understudied within the Muslim community or academic studies at large. Islamic studies departments in Western academia have never fully distanced themselves from their colonial roots within area studies and have primarily focused on lands that US and European military power were interested in. As we launched the Center for Global Muslim Life in April of 2020, this year after the pandemic began, we focused on a unique set of research on emergency response research to the global COVID-19 crisis, research focused on Muslim wellness, the 2020 election in the United States, emerging narrative infrastructure and building that narrative infrastructure through our digital media academy within Muslim communities, global Muslim film, and we will close the year with a conference focused on global Muslim tech and startup ecosystems. The Center for Global Muslim Life is a future-oriented media production lab, meaning that we produce our own media and content to create these transformative narratives ourselves, myself as a filmmaker and with a great network of media producers. We're also a research center that wants to go deeper in these areas I've mentioned. We're also a cultural incubator where we're taking ideas and we're incubating them and showing them across cultural realities. We're especially doing this right now through conferences that bring in diverse people from throughout different sectors based on the issues we're working on around the world to gain really important insights as to the state of our world right now. And finally, we're also a cultural preservation hub because this is one of the most underfunded things with Muslims around the world right now is preserving our culture. Things like the audio recordings of the Quran from throughout history. Who's preserving those things on vinyl, on even digital audio, right? Things like studying the masajid around the world that are being destroyed. Of course, we heard so much about Hagia Sophia, but we hear nothing of the hundreds of masajids around the world that have been destroyed, like in China as an example, and replaced with bars. Our goal really is to create cutting-edge conversations across our diverse Muslim communities. The Center for Global Muslim Life builds connections between a diverse set of faith leaders, media producers, researchers, cultural strategists, artists, technologists, community organizers, and policymakers from throughout the United States and from around the world on key issues impacting Muslim communities. And we're really focused on these diverse set of issues around the world that are being understudied. With this work, we have coined this world. The CGML is focused on the unique set of issues facing the world's largest and most diverse religious community on the planet, while asking key questions about the role Muslims are playing in creating global social and spiritual impact, diverse narratives, and unique contributions to the world around us. In our work, there is no social impact without the spiritual core, our hearts being impacted with the light of Allah to change our world based on our own Islamic worldview. What we've done so far with this center is we've really focused on talking about the future and cutting edge work happening around the world in each of these areas. Our model really is to create convenings for this networked diasporic Muslim communities to then produce research based on the findings from these convenings and then create high quality media to reach wider audiences with our findings. So with the launch of our center, we launched with this idea of the diaspora of our hearts. And we have a beautiful film that I want to play for you real quick to show you some of more in depth what we're talking about.
We've come from so many places on this earth, but our lives share a common destiny as we walk together. In a time of crisis or in a time of peace, this is a story of 8 billion beating hearts. We share this one fragile planet, the air we breathe, the land we walk on, and the oceans we swim in. Imagine borders that surround us, some more fortified than others. Borders for many of us define our lives today. For global capital and those with the right passports, borders are easy. For the global masses, these borders tell us where we can and cannot go. For the world's 2 billion Muslims, 1 out of every 4 people on this earth, our lives are interconnected by the diaspora of our hearts, of our families, and a spiritual lineage that stretches back 14 centuries. But we are only told stories that put us in boxes to police our identities. What if the full story was told about our faith, about our lives, about our cultures, the story of our love for humanity, and our stories as protectors of the world? This is for the future builders, the dreamers, those who want to escape from the futility of generations past destroying our shared world. Media has been built to divide us. We ask, what if it was built to connect? This is a manifesto written across screens. We need you. Beyond languages, beyond cultures, beyond faiths, beyond all barriers and borders, we need each other. This is for all of us.
Yeah, so that was the Diaspora of Hearts and this idea of building this work as a global manifesto for Muslims. Right. From that conference, we created our Global Muslim Film Festival where we featured 60 films from around the world. We took advantage of what COVID created and the ability to create these convenings and to truly bring in people from all over the world. So we had nearly 100 different speakers on that program from all around the world. And we're doing a set of research that talks about what global Muslim film markets truly mean, what they could mean for the future of distribution of global Muslim film. And we had a 3-hour session on Ertugrul from Turkey and how TRT has grown to become the second largest broadcaster in the world after the BBC as a perfect example of these emerging markets, right? We had our 2020 Ramadan Digital Media Awards respecting the incredible work that Muslim communities produced, right? Only months after we all had gone on lockdown, and what was produced in those months to really, really incredible content. Then we had this Hajj of the Hearts program with our partners at LaunchGood, where we focused on what Hajj meant at a time when, of course, we couldn't go on Hajj. We were a distribution partner with our partners at Raise Karma, where we had this incredible arts festival with artists from around the world, like Ras Muhammad from Indonesia, many others, where we were able to bring together arts to really focus on spiritual transformation and healing in these difficult times. We just finished our conference on building an American Muslim political agenda for 2021, talking about the 2020 election. We had a nearly 3-hour long broadcast the night of the 2020 election. And now we hope that we know that either way, we know the outcome now is that we're going to have a new president in the United States, inshallah. But either way, we know that as Muslim communities, we have a lot of organizing to do. We launched our digital media academy that you can check out on our website, globalmuslimlife.com, where we are training people around the world in digital media strategies. We have scholarships available because we understand that in this time where everyone has gone online, there's a lot of our organizations that may not know how to do that work, right? They may not know how to do digital work at a high level. They may not know how to build a brand, how to tell their story online. And so we've created a 5-week course where people come in, and at the beginning of the course, they may not know much. And at the end of the course, they're able to pitch their product for their company or for their nonprofit or whatever it may be. It's a really beautiful conference. And now to close the year, we're getting ready for this Global Muslim Tech and Startup Conference that we're having with partners from around the world, talking about Muslims in tech, ranging from corporations in Silicon Valley to Muslims building startups focused on Muslim populations like Noor Kids and Muzmatch and all these different Muslim startups around the world that have really blown up. How Hijab, all the different ones in Malaysia, all these different hijab companies, etc. Like Nailofa, all kinds of different companies. The Global Muslim, and then finally with that, we're having the Global Muslim Social and Spiritual Impact Awards program, where we're giving awards to the best films of the year, best books, best artists, all these different things, where we really feel as a community, we need to recognize more our beauty and our love for what it is we're doing. And then into 2021, we're looking at global Muslim wellness, global Muslim cities, and building an alliance of Muslim mayors from around the world. But of course, this year it started for me. Before COVID, we had been engaged in this work here at a really grassroots level, and I never want to forget that, even though we're online now, right? Where we created this work around the border mosque with our partners at the border church, where we're at the U.S.-Mexico border, and this work was really, really foundationally important. And we know how transformative it can be, because it's for these families who've been separated by U.S.-Mexico immigration policies, including Muslim families who've been separated by the Muslim ban. And so you can check out our film, A Prayer Beyond Borders, on our website and on YouTube. And we also made this really amazing short film with Rashida Tlaib, where she visited with us to the border, right? We know that I still have a ways to go. I think we're almost at our time within the talk. But ultimately, to close, I wanted to come back to Malaysia. We have to center, because if I'm talking about the future again, we have to talk about the world that we want to build and how we do it. We have to understand our true ideology and our faith, who we are as people, and how to understand the world that's been created around us and how to create transformation. Ultimately, to close and to come back to Malaysia, we have to center and more deeply understand the work of our beloved teacher, Sayyid Muhammad Naqib al-Atas, in his body of work about the worldview of Islam and his book, Islam and Secularism. Sayyid Naqib al-Atas is one of the true geniuses of this ummah, a polymath who is an artist, a designer, a philosopher, a religious thinker, an architect, having designed the stunning Intac campus in Kuala Lumpur. He is sadly, in my opinion, not respected enough within Malaysia, although his books are read at Islamic universities today around the world, including at our own American Muslim Center of Islamic Learning, Zaytuna College. This while also coming from a great lineage of Indonesian ulama or awliya, Sayyid Naqib's work is groundbreaking while also being generations in the making. And it is absolutely foundational for us to understand in building a true future for ourselves as Muslims in the 21st century. If we don't understand the worldview of Islam and what it is, then we won't understand how easily we can be Muslims living our faith, not through our own worldview, but oftentimes through the worldview of
dear viewers, that this program is co-organized by Murtadha International, Philandure, and International Islamic University Malaysia, and supported by LaunchGood and Muhsen, in collaboration with Charity Right, Sabat, Intac, Visit Alay, EGG Tanzania. And for our viewers, don't forget to like the official Facebook page Ummah Summit, and share this live session with your friends and family. And Sheikh Mr. Mustafa, nice to meet you. Please tell us about. I think as a filmmaker, you come. You go through with the difficulties and challenges in creating spiritual art kind of content. How do you come about with this kind of challenges?
Well, I think everyone has difficulty in creating spiritual art because it has so much to do with the state of oneself. There are some great examples of spiritual films in our world, and we had as part of our Global Muslim Film Festival, we had entire sessions on spirituality in film that people can find on YouTube to go more in depth with what those things means. But it really is about excellent direction, excellent production design. You have to understand that you know, when we talk about spirituality and all we do is we set a sheikh in front of a camera, or we, you know, sit an alim in front of a camera, it's not really enough. It's one of the reasons why Sheikh Omar Suleiman is so famous today, is because he started his career with filmmaking. He started his career with making a series of short films that were getting at deep spiritual issues, and he's kept that work engaged, where he's focused on that spiritual aspects of filmmaking. So the spiritual aspects of filmmaking are about cinematography and making sure that you have beautiful imagery within your film. It's about the music or the audio that's playing within the film. You can't, even though some Muslims might be conservative with ideas around music, you can't take an art form that has certain structures and not use music, right? You have to use music in a way, because music is very important. Scores are very important within films in creating emotion within the film. And then it has to, of course, foundationally do with the stories that you're telling. And then it has to do with, if it's not a documentary film, it has to do with the acting. The famous American Muslim actor Mahershala Ali talks a lot about how it's just about the intentions that you're creating when you're creating art, and praying to Allah for tawfiq or divine assistance within the work. So I think the most difficult part of it is getting people to take spirituality and filmmaking seriously. But we see with the rise of the likes of Ertugrul, and my famous series is actually Yunus Emre, that is an entire series just about the path of Islamic spirituality, the path of Sufism, the transformative path of having a sheikh. Like, it's something that could seem fairly mundane and boring if you were to watch an entire television series about that, but it's actually deeply profound, deeply moving, and that's because of the excellence in the filmmaking, which obviously the Turks have gotten down, TRT has gotten down well at a very high level.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Mustafa. So Ertugrul is one of the example of filmmaking, Islamic filmmaking, but your filmmaking is more focused and advocating about racial rights and anti-racism, I believe, in your transforming California from red to blue, and about from Palestine to Mexico. Could you elaborate further about why is it so important to advocate about these things?
I mean, as I was talking about in the lecture, I mean, we live largely through a white supremacist worldview. Most people don't truly understand how much white supremacy has impacted their mind and their thinking, our standards of beauty, the fact that even like throughout Southeast Asia, you have halal skin whiteners, when any idea around skin whitening should be considered to be haram, because it's literally like trying to change yourself and change what Allah has created you as. So as a white Muslim who came to Islam through the door of Malcolm X and understood his radical vision for the world and for ending white supremacy, I believe that our faith takes these things very seriously. So my filmmaking is very much a balance between anti-racist filmmaking and spiritual filmmaking. So with our film, A Prayer Beyond Borders, that's the first part. And the second part is from Palestine to Mexico. A Prayer Beyond Borders is about a relationship between a border church, which is a group of Christian pastors and Christian parishioners who've been gathering at the US-Mexico border to create space for separated families who've been separated by US immigration policies. This park, it's called Friendship Park, which is literally on the ocean here in San Diego, Tijuana, and the fence actually goes out into the water. And so this is the only place on the US-Mexico border where families who've been separated can meet, and they can only meet through the fence with their pinkies. They can touch their pinkies. That's how small the holes are between the fence. They can only meet 4 hours per week. This park is open. And during COVID, it's been closed completely. But so we really wanted to show the difficulty of what it's meant for separated families. And then, so the Border Church started that work, but then we started organizing a group of Muslims called the Border Mosque that then were there monthly as well. And this was actually the first time that the Border Church and the Border Mosque gathered. A year into that relationship, we brought Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib from Michigan. She came with us to the Border Mosque, and she was very, very moved. And it was her first time in Mexico, her first time driving, her first time going across the US-Mexico border. And of course, she had recently been stopped from visiting Palestine and visiting her grandmother. So she had been separated from her own family. And she commented while we were driving in how much this wall had reminded her of her trips to Palestine. And then when we were there at the wall, one of the photographers started talking to her about the history of the construction of the US-Mexico border wall. And actually, it was the head of the Border Patrol who in the 1990s retired from the Border Patrol, and he became a consultant for the state of Israel. And he went and designed the wall and helped to build the wall in Palestine, right? And so unfortunately, these walls are deeply, deeply connected in Palestine and on the US-Mexico border. And so we wanted to make that clear with our film. We had the intention to take the Border Mosque and the Border Church groups to Palestine this year, but of course, Allah's plans were Allah's plans with everything that happened in our world, where none of us have been traveling at all. And then the California from Red to Blue film is about the long-term investment in communities of color and community organizing that shifted California from being a red state or a Republican state to now becoming 70 to 80% plus Democratic state led by communities of color. A similar process is actually happening right now in Texas. And Texas is majority community of color, but because there hasn't been investments in community organizing in communities of color, the white population still controls much of the voting and power in Texas, even though we began to see it shifting in this presidential election here in 2020.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Mustafa. Our dear viewers, that Mr. Mustafa is a graduate of Bachelor's in Ethnic Studies and Master's in Ethnic Studies. So we can see that not only Sheikh that graduated from Sharia background that can contribute to society, and Mr. Mustafa had contributed a lot, and his films are focused on Muslim communities, Muslim life, promoting peace. And the racism is also a kind of pandemic all over the world, including Malaysia. I believe that you, Mr. Mustafa, in the future will also make a film about Syed Naqib Alatas, perhaps?
I mean, it's one of our prayers to make a film about Sayyid Muhammad Naqib Alatas. He's really one of the great geniuses of our world and one of the most important philosophers of the 20th and 21st century. Unfortunately, I don't think he's respected enough within Malaysia. If we're to understand the future of our world, we have to understand how this world was created. I think his book, Islam and Secularism, and his books about the worldview of Islam are so foundational. So our goal is to, inshallah, make a film. I'm working with my director partner, Ovidio Salazar, who made a film about Imam Ghazali. who made a number of really amazing films, a number of films about Hajj. And so our goal is to be in Malaysia within the next year, inshallah, shooting that film and really talking about the ideas of Sayyid Naqib al-Atas and talking about it maybe in a more accessible way, because we realize that most people may not be able to access, deep philosophical work takes a lot of training, especially when he's talking not only about the history of Westernization and secularism, but then he's talking about deep spiritual and theological concepts from the Islamic worldview as well. So we think that a film could make these things more accessible and make people understand even the role he played, right? Sayyid Naqib, many people may not know, he designed the Intac campus from scratch himself when they were building that university for Sayyid Naqib. And so his genius is underappreciated. He, of course, he designed the Ummah logo when he was like 18 years old. His uncle, who was one of the heads of the party at the time, asked him to do that. Not saying anything about the party today, but I mean, that shows like his level of calligraphy. He's a world-renowned artist, even as a calligraphist. So I think that he's underappreciated. We really hope that we can create something beautiful that shows his spiritual journey, his intellectual journey, and who he is as a world thinker who's studied in Islamic universities around the world, who's studied in mainstream universities around the world, and we pray that his work is known even more by the Muslims, because without understanding the work of Sayyid Naqib al-Atas, I think that we as Muslims have a harder time understanding the world that we live in today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mustafa. So, as a reverted Muslim, can I know, can our dear viewers know about what drives you to make a lot of very good content Islamic film? And don't you feel depressed when who are looking at who are watching on my video or film, or what drives you to do more and more? And as what you said just now, that Islam will be the largest religious community in 50 years time, and period of oppression will be over. But what is our role now? What is our duty now? What should we do now? What are the work to be done now?
Yeah, so if you think about it, Muslims are already the world's largest religion in terms of one spiritual community, meaning that we actually all have solidarity with each other for the most part, even though we may have some small theological differences. Maybe some of us are more into tasawwuf than others. Maybe some of us are more into certain aspects of the deen. But we generally speaking, you meet a Muslim, we can say Assalamu alaikum and we can agree on things. Whereas the Christian community is split into many factions, right? So already we're the largest religious community in the world. And my question is, how do we get out of reactionary thinking, where we constantly are just reacting to the world with no strategy, no plan? So a lot of what we're trying to do with the Center for Global Muslim Life is really create that strategy, that plan, that blueprint for how we look at Muslims creating art around the world, how we look at Muslims impacting things like cities around the world, how we look at the different Muslim education systems and universities, and even at the primary school level, the Islamic institutions that are being built. How do we understand those things? How would we make them better? So I think a lot of that is the future of our world, is how do we really create content? How do we create culture? How do we create media? So that's what drives me, is that if we don't tell our own story, if we don't talk about what our worldview is, then people will tell the story for us. I mean, it's ridiculous when you see the type of Hollywood content that has Muslims in it, right? Like we have an entire digital media academy where we go through what that you can find on our website, globalmuslimlife.com, where we go through different types of storytelling, where we talk about classical Muslim storytelling, Islamic storytelling, and then we talk about what's being made today, right? And there's shows where like this Muslim woman is a firefighter and she's a hijabi, and all of a sudden her hijab is blown off and her hair is beautiful. And it's ridiculous, the type of representation of Muslims. Things are getting better with Muslims working in Hollywood. So you have like the Miss Marvel show that's coming on Disney Plus within the next couple of years that should do a good job because of the filmmakers that are involved and Muslim filmmakers being like driving that content. But we have to be telling our own story and telling the diverse story of the Ummah. Like I talked about in the lecture, if 70% of the Muslim world is in Africa and in Asia, and yet maybe 1% of global media content is about African and Asian Muslims, it shows you how out of whack a true understanding of Islam is, when especially the most balanced understanding of Islam in our world is in Africa and Asia. It's, I've lived in West Africa, I've lived in North Africa, of course I've lived in Southeast Asia, and people just have a more balanced understanding of life. Like I talk about, Sayyid Naqib talks about how we have to have a dunyawi understanding of our life and an akhirah understanding of our life, that our lives are between these two things. It's not just one secular understanding of living our lives in the westernized world of a dunya-centric reality, right? So it's really about creating balance and championing a true understanding of Islamic thought in our world.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Mustafa. So we have only 3 minutes left. So could you give us your summary and your last words for this session?
Yeah, like I said, so you can find me at Dustin Craun on all the social media networks. You can find Global Muslim Life on all the social media networks at Global Muslim Life. GlobalMuslimLife.com is where you can find our work, reach out. Like I said, we have scholarships for our Digital Media Academy. We have a number of people in Malaysia and Singapore and Indonesia that are part of the course. So we welcome you. We really want to help train the next generation of media producers. So ahlan wa sahlan, you're welcome. Love to you all, love to Malaysia. Like I said, I know that these are very difficult times, but we have to believe in the promise of Allah that with hardship will come ease. And with that, we have to be thinking about what our future looks like so that when people turn to us in flocks and they want to know about our deen, that we can give them the true beauty and vision that Allah has blessed us with of what Islam actually is. And so that's my prayer and that's what we're trying to do with this center. And so I hope that you all can support the work. I hope to be back in Malaysia soon. You all should recognize what a blessing you have in your country, but at the same time, vote in, support good candidates who are good people and aren't corrupt politicians that will, defame your country. We just went through an election here ourselves. And so we pray for good leadership for our Ummah throughout it. Jazakallah khair. Thank you all for having me.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mustafa. But we have one last question here from Syed Ismail. He said, there are many stories that needs to be told in correcting and understanding Islam, but there are not enough film or movies that show our side of the story, especially history. Are you in a position to do anything?
I mean, that's the position that we're trying to create. We created the Global Muslim Film Festival to champion global Muslim film, to talk about the market. We have a research report we're working on that talks about global Muslim film markets. We have to show that the market exists. And like we said, things like Ertugrul begin to show that. All the Malaysian and Indonesian content on Netflix is a good example. People consuming that around the world are baselines for building that market. But now we have to have film financiers. We have to have filmmakers who can do the work, who aren't just, we have a lot of Muslims who are filmmakers, but maybe they don't have the correct worldview or understanding of Islam, that don't have the correct understanding of Islamic spirituality. And so if you don't have that in your heart, you can't represent those things on film. So we need, to be trained within our deen. We need to be trained within filmmaking, and we need the right financiers in place to really create this global Muslim film market. That's a lot of what we're working on now. Like I said, on our website, you can find out more and look at all the different sessions from last year's Global Muslim Film Festival. The next Muslim Film Festival will be in, I believe, May of 2021, inshallah. I hope you all
Thank you
check
so
it
much,
out.
Mr. Mustafa. We appreciate your presence and your lecture with us. And a few takeaways is that not only we want to educate our children to become a doctor or an architect or an accountant, but we need more filmmakers and Islamically minded filmmakers like Mustafa Dustin Craun himself. So Jazakumullahu khairan so much for our honorable speaker, Mr. Mustafa Dustin Craun. Thank you so much.